Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual journal club session. It is April 16, 2020, and I am thrilled to be welcoming all of you and our presenters to today's program. Before I start the introductions and turn this over to our presenters, I'd like to remind you all that in preparation for this session, we have asked you to reflect on some of the key areas that you are having difficulties in with respect to planning and delivering CPD conferences and medical education in person. So at this point, if you could just go to the chat section on your dashboard and you will see a link from Katie Keel. If you just click on that, it's a very quick 4-question survey that I'd like you to please complete at this time, and then we can come back to it at the end of the session. So thank you for doing that. So the topic today is reimagining medical meetings and conferences, so CME, CE conferences during and post COVID-19 crisis. And as many of you know who join our Journal Club monthly, this is a series that we have put together to learn around the topics of interest and learn from each other as much as from our experts that we invite to provide introductory notes. This topic, as well as the one we had on the 26th of March, we have really opened up to a broader community in continuing professional development because there's such a need for social contact, for learning on these topics, and these ideas as well as pain points are emerging very quickly. So I'd like to remind you that this session is going to be recorded and that you will all get a link to it. It is available for free to everybody, and it will sit also on the front page of the SACME COVID-19 resources. So without then further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters and dear colleagues and friends who were generous with their time and agreed to join us today to lead this discussion. So we have Dr. Alvaro Margolis, who is coming to us from Uruguay. Dr. Margolis is an internist with a master's degree in biomedical informatics from the University of Utah. He is a founding member of the International Academy of Health Sciences Informatics and associate editor of Applied Clinical Informatics. He's also the president of the GAME, the Global Alliance for Medical Education, and the director of EviMed. This is the platform that is really leading and reimagining and imagining online education and has been for some time now. And so he's coming to us from that experience as well as his clinical and educator's background. Joining Dr. Margolis is Dr. Jann Balmer, who probably does not need a lot of introduction. She's a dear colleague. Dr. Balmer has served as director of CME at the University of Virginia School of Medicine for some time now, and under her leadership, the program has grown tremendously in all kinds of ways. What you may not know is that Jann is also strategic director for CE unit and serves as co-lead nurse planner for the School of Nursing, and she holds faculty appointments in both School of Medicine and School of Nursing at the University of Virginia. So without further ado, I may mention that my name, which I forgot to say, is Mila Kostic, and I host this series, and I'm also going to be your facilitator today. So please go ahead, Jann, get us started.
Okay, so welcome to everybody. We're thrilled to talk with you. Our agenda today is that we're going to talk about the state of continuing medical education activities, particularly live activities and medical meetings prior to the crisis, looking at existing solutions that we're all trying and scrambling to do in managing the crisis, looking at digital technologies and live meetings, how UVA is implementing some of these concepts, and then we'll talk about some conclusions and some discussion. Next slide. So for a lot of us, you know, around the globe, but my experience is primarily in the United States. Many of our academic centers regularly hold live departmental conferences and jointly provide regional, state, and national society meetings, work with groups to do those kinds of things. We also have regularly scheduled series that are part of our academic milieu and happen every day and every week. And are considered very much part of our everyday life and work. Our focus has generally been on credit and MOC points with business as usual. And while we have less educational grants, we've been able to get a fair amount of exhibit monies. But it really has been very much a live format. Physicians and healthcare professionals leave their workplace environment in many situations and come to actively engage and interact in a live environment. So next slide. So what the emergence of the COVID pandemic has done for us. At the UVA, we had 22 conferences scheduled between the middle of March and the end of June, which clearly we've had to make some adjustments to. The first thing that we found was that our faculty and staff were banned from traveling. Before anything else happened, the travel bans went into place, which then created quite an upheaval around how we were going to manage live conferences and meetings prior to these governmental actions taking place, like states of emergency and other kinds of things. And there were lots of considerations, you know, getting faculty from other institutions to fly in and out, our faculty who were no longer allowed to go off grounds or off campus in order to speak. We had hotel contracts and a number of other kinds of things, AV contractors, other hotel blocks, other kinds of things, you know, caterers. There were tons of logistic things in addition to accreditation and educational kinds of impact. So what we really wanted to look at was the implications and for how we did other non-COVID content and how we can really make some adjustments. And I think we had one program that less than 36 hours before it was supposed to go live had to decide whether to postpone, cancel, or go virtual. And we went virtual with it. We had to cancel the second day because it was interactive hands-on workshops, but the first day went beautifully, and everyone was thrilled because they really wanted the content and were happy that we were able to come up with a creative solution, but it was at the very least a scramble. Next slide. So as we looked at things, and because we had so many activities coming up, much like many of our colleagues across the country and across the globe, was what could we reasonably do in terms of remote and virtual presentations? Did they need to be live, or could we make them asynchronous? And how were we going to make adjustments to the educational design so that we were still in alignment with the desired outcomes that we had for these conferences in the first place? And then how were we going to, the next set of questions really were, how were we going to get the audience to be engaged? You know, as we're doing today, chat box questions. Could we continue to use ARS systems or embed questions in our presentations through teleconference platforms? Were there ways to do case presentations where we could actually get participant feedback? How are we going to manage panels and other kinds of things? Those educational design questions took a lot of time and effort. We actually came up with a whole series of approaches for our faculty course directors so that they could make informed decisions about what the resources were that we had available to us and that we could quickly mobilize into educational formats in a way that made good sense for them. You know, we had we actually have a meeting coming up with poster presentations where we're actually putting those poster presentations in Coursera. So there's some interesting things that we can do that we can talk about later. But the other big question was we had a number of meetings that have quite a few exhibitors, and how do you create a virtual exhibit hall or a product showcase? And are there ways to really enhance the opportunities that are routinely provided by a face-to-face exhibit hall? And how could we make that work better? You know, could they do pre-recorded sales information? Could we do links to company websites? How would we do that? How would we maintain the standards of commercial support while continuing to do that work? And then how we could best approach other kinds of activities and such in a way that, you know, managing all these accreditation requirements sort of on the fly sort of made us think, you know, go back and look closely at what the requirements were and how we could best adjust and pivot around those requirements in a way that made good sense. Next slide. So I think for me and for my staff, what this really did was give us an opportunity, and we started to ask ourselves, how does this change the value proposition for us as CME providers and us as a profession? You know, we really needed to really think about how the work that we did. We talk regularly about working with our course directors, but many of them really believe we work for them as opposed to with them. So the fact that we decided to proactively develop solutions for transforming this traditional CME and CME programming and giving it to them as sort of an informed consent kind of option, as opposed to asking them to develop it. We also created opportunities to talk about other innovative approaches that we thought we could implement quickly through self-assessment, content messaging, looking at resources for presenters and participants. You know, we moved all of our syllabi are electronic and are accessible through our website. So that created a really nice opportunity for us to create a virtual exhibit hall that was not connected directly to the educational content. Are there opportunities for us to utilize the content in multiple programming options? Are there things that we've done live that we could repurpose and reutilize? We know our medical students and nursing students, they're looking for content all over the place because they're also doing remote education for them. And are there ways that we can modify the content, adjust it, and work more collaboratively with the other parts of the School of Medicine and School of Nursing to really make good sense? You know, and then create opportunities for new content, really looking at strategies that make a difference in terms of creating revenue streams for us, supporting the work and research of our departments in ways that we hadn't really thought about. We've moved our regularly scheduled series to virtual, and we're creating new opportunities for them. And we really think that most of our RSSs may ultimately go to an enduring materials format just because the demands of clinical practice are such that for them to all to get together physically in one space, number one, is prohibited, and number two, is just not feasible currently. So next slide. So I guess for me, as our office sits and looks at this work, we're really looking at how we can utilize this crisis as a value proposition for us, and that we are in fact an integral part of the health system in a way. CME and continuing education content sort of is an afterthought. People think about it, but they don't really, they sort of take it for granted. And so we're actively looking at ways that we can leverage synchronous and sequential and asynchronous content to provide new sources of revenue that can augment the sources of revenue that, one, have been compromised because we can't do live meetings, but then actually provide could potentially provide a broader reach for us. As I mentioned, how we can incorporate it into graduate and undergraduate and education environments. Is there valuable content and information within our institution that could be used more broadly? And how do we do that? And that this really is an opportunity for us. We know everyone is busy, but there are gaps and holes in service delivery. Everyone still needs to meet their credentialing requirements. Everyone still needs to meet their licensing requirements. And how can we step in and be a supportive, valuable asset to the institution in a way that they hadn't really considered before? Next slide. So I'm going to turn this over to Alvaro now, who's going to talk about some digital technologies and live meetings. You know, in full disclosure, Alvaro and I have known each other for a very long time and have worked on projects before. And this is a really interesting concept that I'm excited he's going to share with you.
Well, thank you, Jann, and good afternoon to everybody. So we're going to talk about digital technologies and live meetings. But first of all, some history. There's a lot of history. Here you can see a paper that was shared with you, and it has 2 decades, and it has a lot of very interesting concepts. But the technology around meetings has not been too innovative, or it's been pretty conservative, the use, in the sense that it didn't change the actual reality of meetings. And it's not because of the technology itself. You can see a lot of very interesting concepts here in this paper from 20 years ago. The concepts are not really rocket science, and what I'm going to show you as an example in a few minutes is not rocket science either. The problem here is what it says here for Anita Albers, who is a researcher from Harvard Business School, about the entertainment industry. And she says, should an established company risk cannibalizing its revenues in a traditional channel by pursuing a strong competitive position in a new channel? And for conferences, the problem is that for associations, the annual conference or the conferences are an important part of the revenue. So they, the word that, or the concept that you see is fear when you present really different models, because the conference usually is an important part of the revenue, and it works pretty well for all the purposes. But of course, now we have the crisis that doesn't allow the live meetings to continue, and that's why there's a lot of analysis of what to do. So so this concept that about the extended Congress that I'm showing you is not something so really different, but it's difficult to implement because of the reason that I just said before. So let me just introduce the concept and then show you an example of the implementation. So the concept of extended Congress is the extension in time, in space, and in languages of a live meeting with the use of digital technologies. And the idea is to unleash the reach of traditional meetings through the use of technology to access larger audiences in maybe in different languages or not, and across a country, maybe reaching further in a large country like the US, and internationally, and also to improve knowledge translation into practice through a sequential and active learning process. So, and the second part, the main word is engagement. How do you have people engaged over time to have a dialogue with other participants and with the faculty, so that people remain part of the audience over the period of time that it takes the extended conference? So, and the example that I want to show you is the 2020 peritoneal dialysis extended Congress. And this is the design of it with the green here in the second spot here is where when the live conference was going to take part, which was suspended because of the pandemic. But this is the way it was designed, and we can talk later why the conditions were there for these associations to engage in this maybe threatening kind of design, as I said before, but eventually they did. So this is the way we designed the extended Congress. So first thing, under the circle, you see around the live conference, which is it says pre-Congress and Congress. The Congress was going to take place on March 27 and 28 of this year. And there were some designed pre-Congress activities, which both the pre-Congress and Congress are free access to on-site participants and also to remote participants who registered for this activity. And so it's meant to people who cannot go to the live meeting to participate as well, but they have to register and they can participate in this part. But also the live attendees can just participate there because they are attending the live conference. So there, what you have, so a few days before the actual conference, recorded mini lectures, online networking with other participants and with faculty, and voting of papers and posters, as you will see in a few minutes that I'm going to show you how it's done. So, and papers were submitted even if people didn't go. So people who were going to be remote or who were going to be live submitted the papers. They went through the review process and they are shared in the online platform. And also around the Congress activity in the green part, there was designed a launching webinar meant to summarize the conclusions of the conference. And also Congress news were going to be, and this is something that didn't happen because there was no live conference, but there was going to be local correspondents, medical correspondents, sharing the news with the rest of the participants, both live and remote. And after this, you have 6 more weeks here of different topics discussed, the Congress key topics. And for this, you have to be registered. You have to go through a registration process. And it's highly interactive, as I'm going to show in a moment. So this is the login page. And sorry, the image is in Spanish. So the audience is Spanish-speaking professionals, both physicians and nurses who work in peritoneal dialysis. But the rest is translated into English with Google Translator. So most of the things that you see are also in English. So we have over 700. We are having right now over 700 participants with 22 faculty. And as you can see here to the right, yesterday morning when I was doing the screen captures to share with you, and you can see the names are deleted here. You see people from different countries, Argentina, I think Colombia, and then Mexico, Uruguay. And the timing from this person here, 10:38 in the morning to 10:45 myself, is 7 minutes. So these people are going into the platform because of the discussion that's happening. What I was saying about engaging the participants. So in the opening week, as an example, here, first of all, you can see here to the left the program with all of the modules, with the 7 weeks in total, opening week and then 5 content modules, and then a closing week. But then if we go to the opening week, you can see a taped lecture by a Portuguese-speaking professor who is subtitled into Spanish for the benefit of the participants. Also, the slides are translated into Spanish. So having breaking down the barrier, at least from the speaker's perspective, also with the English speakers. And here you can see voting of this presentation, and so there's some social application functionalities here. And to the right, you can see, for example, a semi-professional network. People are related to each other who attend this event. So, and we have a way to know that information and to use that using social network analysis to show what's of more interest to them around the discussions. So, for example, comments that may interest you uses that information about your contacts. and the voting of the elements of the activity, so that it shows you what's probably more interesting for you. And then here you have the opening forum with the three faculty, the three coordinators, a nurse from Argentina and two physicians from Colombia and from Brazil who coordinated the extended Congress, both the on-site and the components. And here you can see the people voted their comments here. And the responses also with the participants and with the faculty in the opening forum. So people introduce themselves, they introduce their teams, and the faculty answer to them and greets them. So this kind of interaction gets the engagement part that I was talking about. And also, as Jann mentioned before, if there is a conference and it's a scientific conference, you have papers, and you have to see a way to have those papers in the platform. In this case, here are some of the examples of the papers that were sent, and people can, instead of walking by the poster or hearing a presentation and asking questions, people can vote here, and also they can have a dialogue. You see 17 comments here to this one, and 16 here, and 18 to this one. So people engage in a conversation with the authors. And here's just an example of a comment from another participant from another country talking with the author of one of these papers. And we talked about the extension over time, over 1.5 months of the Congress, also the extension with languages, actually, at least from the side of the faculty, extended with English-speaking faculty and Portuguese-speaking faculty, also from Spanish-speaking faculty, but participants in this case are only Spanish-speaking participants. Sometimes we do Spanish and Portuguese, but not in this case. And you can see the registered participants come mainly from Mexico and Argentina, the two largest Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America. And then you have Costa Rica, Peru, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador. You have people from all over the region. And you have some Brazilians as well, even though the activity was in Spanish. Some to participate, but in general, if the activity was also in Portuguese, you would have seen 10 times as many Brazilians, around 200 for the proportion with the other countries. So the language here for the participants is a barrier that we didn't address in this activity, but it's something that is worthwhile noting. Also with Portugal, which is somewhere lower here, we didn't have so many participants from there, but you can see participants from many places that have gone to the live conference in this case. So you can think about the limitations here, but also you can think if the model is successful as it is proven to be, you can think about, for example, having satellite sessions in native languages in different countries or cities for the starting session. You can think about even having a spin-off with Congress highlights after the event, as for example the American Society of Nephrology does, but it's a live activity over one day in another setting, in another meeting across the world. Well, you could do that online instead of doing live. So you can think about different variations of this. So of course, you have to do a formal stakeholder analysis of this type of meeting because you need to understand how the changes impact association that organizes the meeting, the participants who attend or who may attend remotely the meeting, and you need to understand how the professional Congress organizers who organize the live event are impacted, also the commercial supporters, as Jann said, etc. You need to understand exactly and address this formally as in any project. And finalizing this part, there's a winner-take-all dynamic, and the entertainment industry. What Anita Albert says is that advances in digital technologies foster concentration and a winner-take-all dynamic, with new technologies increasingly give people around the world access to the most sought-after television programs, movies, books, and opera performances. And the same thing applies to education. So there might be a long tail effect where more things are accessible to people because of digital technologies, but also there's a concentration effect here going on, at least if it happens the same as in the entertainment industry. So I turn the space here to Mila to see if we have any questions and comments so far from Jann's presentation from me.
Thank you so much, both. So at this point, I'd like to just remind everybody that there are two ways to engage in the discussion. You can raise your hand. So if you look at your dashboard, at the top, you'll see a hand icon. If you click on it, I'll be able to see that you're interested in providing a commentary, and we'll unmute your line, and so you can talk and let us know your question or a comment. Or you can type your question in the question section, and we'll read it out loud. So for now, I noticed that we had Elizabeth Patterson with a raised hand for quite some time. And I'm going to unmute Elizabeth. Go ahead.
No, sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay. All right. So that's fine. We have Deborah Land with a raised hand. So Deborah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. This is very interesting and very impressive. It looked very engaging and interactive. One of the questions that's come up for a potential activity in which we're involved for an international event, which looks as though you had such, the timing for the presentations with the consideration of time differences. For interacting those sessions in which you have live interaction. How did you address those time lapses, and were they large such that, it was daytime for the speaker and nighttime for the learner? Did you have that situation, and how did you address it?
Yes, it's a very good question, a very good point, Deborah. First of all, most of the activities that we do are asynchronous. I didn't mention this explicitly, but I should say it. So except for the launching webinar, everything else is asynchronous. So we publish, for example, on Tuesday, the week 1, week 2, and people get an email with the information, and they get a daily summary of the discussions. But most things that happen are not live. So there is not such a big issue with time zone differences. Second, but when we do live events, we do take into, for example, the launching webinar, and we do sometimes talking with the experts along the weeks. So this is a kind of an open, no slides, nothing. It's a topic and questions, and the participants ask questions, and the experts answer the questions as they come along, or they can be sent before. For that purpose, we basically take into account the time zones of the Americas. So, which is in Uruguay, we're 1 hour ahead of New York. So we don't have so many time zones in Latin America, as you don't have so many time zones in the US and Canada. So you can accommodate that. Of course, when we have a larger Spanish audience or Portuguese audience, we have to make sure that the time zone for them is also correct. It's not in the middle of the night, which is it's much later. So that's the way we address time zone differences. Basically, we don't have the problem because most of the activities are asynchronous.
Thank you. There are a whole lot of questions in the typed questions that relate to what platform and what software was used for a program like your conference, Alvaro. So do you want to maybe talk about that?
Okay. No, we developed the platform, and there are, of course, many other choices, as Jann was commenting, but we developed a platform to ensure multilingual support, also the interaction with the, I mean, the social learning analytics that we work with to have a good interaction among the participants and with the experts, also with the information about the materials. So the platform for the that I showed is developed by us. For the webinars, what we use is Webinar Jam, and it has a good potential. I mean, we all we like GoToWebinar, like in this case, or Zoom. But if you really have large audiences, you don't have the problem with licensing with Webinar Jam, and it works very well. Last week we did a webinar about COVID-19 with experts from Spain and from Argentina, and we had 1,400 participants, and there's no licensing limits, and it works well as well.
Thank you. Here's a question for Jann. Would you be able to expand on your comments regarding options for exhibits? We have Allison asking if you've had a faculty that she had a faculty member ask them about offering an option to have exhibit commercials to run during breaks or lunch in lieu of traditional exhibit hall at a live program. So have you had success with these types of alternative formats? Is the question.
Well, we're still working out some of the bugs, but we have done it twice now. What we've done was we basically, if you remember the standards of commercial support, they talk about a program book. So what we basically did was we created an electronic virtual exhibit hall where if the exhibitor could provide us with the information about the products that they would be, you know, the information that they would want to share with participants, we gave them the option of doing a little short video about what their talking points were and those kinds of things, and then gave them the opportunity to put their business card or their contact information, and then a link to their company websites and their product websites. And then that information actually was put in a separate document that sat on our web portal that was under the heading of the conference, but separate from the syllabus materials. It was a separate document. So we do our electronic syllabus. We've moved to electronic syllabi, one, because we know our speakers change their talks all the time. And two, printing a syllabus is just exorbitant. And we know that they throw them away at the end, that we find a lot of them left at the conference site. So they actually prefer the slides in color and a number of other kinds of things. So what we've done is we've moved to an electronic format where we put the slides in PDF format. They can do Post-it notes on it if they want, or other kinds of things. But we have a separate electronic syllabus, and then we along with that syllabus, we also memorialize the on-site handout that gives all the disclosure information and all of the things that we would normally provide: educational objectives, disclosures, agenda, all that kind of stuff. And then the presentations are put in chronological order, and that's a separate document. And then we have the virtual exhibit hall, and we're continuing to play with it and come up with ideas that make it more more exciting for the exhibitors, because we know they're not allowed to travel either. So
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
Thank you. So let's go to a question from Suzanne Schnivas. I unmuted your line, Susan.
Oh, sorry. I had the question around the platform that was used, so I put it in the chat box.
Okay, great. So that was answered. Thank you very much.
So
we have, go ahead.
Michaela,
Yeah.
have Alvaro talk. Alvaro, you got a grant from your government or from a special organization to help create this platform, correct?
Yes, actually we developed all the social learning analytics that I mentioned. with a grant from an innovation fund from the government of Uruguay. So we got 2 grants. Basically, the first one was about how to use information about contacts of people who know each other and participate in a large activity, educational activity like a conference or a course, how to use that information using social network analysis to improve the interaction online without increasing the tutoring needs, in the sense that you may have 2,000 participants. How many tutors do you need for that? So how can you engage in a good significant dialogue using that information, similarly to Facebook or LinkedIn, that uses, I mean, you don't have tutors for Facebook or for LinkedIn. It uses your contact information to ensure that what you hear is important for you, because it comes from somebody that you respect, or who is a connector, a hub, or who is a leader, and so on. So doing that kind of social network analytics, we work with a PhD in physics to do all the algorithms to run that, and then after that we got a second grant, innovation grant, to do all the, instead of the connections among people, the connections among people and with the platform elements, like the courses or the materials within a course, and using the same kind of algorithms, but more standard, which are called friend sourcing. Instead of crowdsourcing, which is the knowledge of the crowd, it's friend sourcing, because it takes the knowledge of the crowd, but also the knowledge of who your friends are in the network, what's of more use for you as a future course, or as a material that may be of interest for you within a course. So that's published in a paper. It's one of the references that you have, that you received.
Thank you. Let's go to Helena Philippe with a question. Raised hand. Helena, I unmuted you.
Hello, greetings from Lisbon. A very warm hug from Lisbon from me to Mila. Thank you so much for the marvelous presentations of Alvaro and Jann. Thank you so much for being able to see you. It's so very good to see friends speaking and about things so, you know, exciting. I would start, it's a kind of a comment, and I think somehow my question has been already answered, or at least in part some approach to my question by Alvaro's last intervention. But I would like to share with others of all here gathered, that that makes us think that were we struck by a falling planet or by a star, a falling star? I would like to choose we are struck by a falling star, because I think that this makes us and prompt us to delve into technology, to refine technology and put it to, you know, good work in service in the benefit of good practices of medical education. So it's kind of, we have to raise the bar of medical education strategies to be, you know, just up to maintain engagement with the learners to be together. My very biggest concern is how to introduce and to maintain the human factor that we can feel when we are face to face. And this can be a little bit challenging, or I think it will be the most challenging, is to, you know, just create this human factor, create a safe environment where learners and all the community together, you know, just moving towards the same objectives and goal of learning, can feel themselves, you know, building relationships and learning together. And this is something that Alvaro has already approached by the social analytics. So it's a kind of, you know, just in these MOOC models and numerous audiences in courses can be a way of making an approach for that. But I would like to hear a little bit more from you. And I also see, I may be just naive, but what I think is that with this kind of pushing for the need for technology, and my experience here in Portugal is my society has been canceling all the events. There's a lot of congresses and meetings, international congresses and meetings that I was supposed to be attending and were canceled. And this prompts educators, the whole community, educators, IT learners, everyone is involved, not to miss the moment, take benefit of technology and moving forward with it. So this is kind of school without, without walls, without borders, and I would prefer to see it that way. But I would like to hear a little bit more about,
It looks like, thank you, Helena, for your questions and your commentary. The sound is getting, the quality of sound, I think, trailed off. And I don't know if anybody would like to add something here. If not, there are a couple of questions, Jann, that I'd like to get to before we continue that relate to the exhibit. So people are very interested.
Just I mentioned that from what Elena just said, actually the human factor, let's remember that the live meetings will continue to exist.
Exactly.
They are not going to disappear. So this is something that will be part of the menu much more than what it has been so far, but live meetings will continue to exist. And you can do engaging activities over the internet as well, but live meetings will continue there. So there's that's going to continue happening.
Thank you. That's absolutely a key point. And also that, I think it's very interesting to see that at the time of social isolation, we are coming up with ways to engage socially and do it both in a synchronous and asynchronous way. And I think that's very important not to lose track of that. So Jann, questions around exhibit halls. So one of them was, were exhibitors willing to pay normal rates for the virtual exhibit hall? And then the second one was, do people access the electronic exhibit hall? Has it affected your exhibitors' or sponsors' willingness to fund your meeting? And then there was a question on separation of the two environments.
So separation of the two environments is required, which is why we put the exhibit hall in a separate electronic document. So we let participants know about that. I probably wouldn't interleaf it in my educational program. You could make it a separate, if you're in a web-based platform, you could make it a separate tab. There's a whole bunch of ways that you can do that. Our exhibitors did pay. A lot of our meetings were live meetings and they'd already paid, and we didn't want to lose that revenue. And so we came up with these creative alternatives. But I think everybody was sort of a little bit over a barrel. I think that as we get better at figuring this out, I think they will pay, but I think we have to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that every industry and every business in the globe, around the globe, has had some kind of financial impact associated with that. So what I would say is that it wouldn't hurt for you to be somewhat a little more conservative about your exhibit fees. The fact that they're going to have limited travel budgets and other kinds of things, if you want their engagement and feel that that's an important supplement to the educational content, then I think you have to be thoughtful about what you think it's going to cost and what you think it's going to work, how it's going to work. Most of the educational grants at this point, a lot of those companies have put everything on hold. We did have some people who canceled. We had some who were willing to try it. I mean, I think we're going to need to continue to be really creative about how we work out these solutions, because I think there is a space where physicians and healthcare teams and advanced practice providers and nurses and pharmacists and other people need product-specific education and content, but that's outside the scope of what accredited education is in the United States. So, you know, we just need to figure out what those creative solutions are, and I don't think we've worked out all the bugs yet.
Thank you. Before we continue, and I would like us to continue now with the presentation, just want to remind everybody, if you have joined late and haven't had a chance to click on the link in the chat, a very brief survey, 4 quick questions. Please do that now if you can.
Okay, so should we go on? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how UVA is what we're trying to do. I'm using this as a case study, that not that we're getting it all right by any stretch of the means, but we're certainly hustling and trying. So one of the things that we're very fortunate is that we have a long history of using web-based technology platforms, and we've been involved since 1999. Cardio Village is now one of our 20-year-old web-based educational activities. We continue to utilize a lot of web-based technology platforms. We work with outside providers. The university does not have, cannot turn products around and projects around within the timeframes that we need to meet our contractual obligations when we work with joint providers and other kinds of things. The other interesting thing for us has been that UVA had gotten an institutional license for Coursera, which is a MOOC company. We're utilizing that to augment some of our other platforms, and it actually has broadened our ability to pivot and meet the needs of our departments. And as I mentioned before, we're literally creating a short Coursera course for every one of our poster presentations for our pathology research day. And the way we're setting up the credit is that everyone has to review at least 5 of the poster presentations in order to get the credit and provide reflective comments on it and those kinds of things. We're also working with our CME affiliates. We work with hospitals and organizations across our state. We work with also some national societies and are looking at how we can help them through existing relationships that we have with vendors, existing ideas and technologies that we know we're capable of providing, and that we can do in a relatively reasonable period of time. We are consistently building and recommending to course directors and leadership the benefits of really looking at asynchronous learning as part of the armamentarium of continuing education and continuing professional development. I think if anything, this crisis has shown us that live activities in and of themselves are not adequate or sufficient to meeting the continuing professional development needs of our physicians and our nurses and our healthcare teams. And so we need to come up with strategies, and we need to match those strategies to what the resources are that the organizations and the departments have, and what their priorities are. So next slide. Can you get the next slide?
It's the second one, right?
Yeah. So just go on. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, yeah, that's fine. Just go to the conclusions, Alvaro.
Oh, okay.
So I think we've got a number of take-home messages. I'm going to talk about a couple, and then I think the meetings of the future are going to be more intensive in terms of their integration and technology. I would just caution us to really think about the kinds of things that we need to do. CME providers and continuing education providers and people who plan live meetings and deal with accreditation a lot in the United States, as well as people like Alvaro who are medical education companies and publishing companies and everyone, we have a wealth of knowledge that that we don't always leverage to its fullest extent. And it is now a place for us to step in and have really focused conversations with our course directors and our content experts in a way that we haven't had those conversations before. And as part of that, one of the exercises and things that we've done is in the resources, you'll find a guide that asks a series of questions about your role and the kinds of questions you may want to think about and ask as you move forward. Because I think this is going to be an ongoing narrative and conversation that we're all going to need to have with each other. And this is just the beginning of it. So I'm going to turn it over now to Alvaro so that he can go through the rest of the take-home messages.
Thank you, Jann. No, I put the sign as an example of the formats that will be used, and by no means it's the only one, but definitely some of these designs, when thought in advance, will act as an insurance policy for live events. And in one of the resources that we put together in the next slide, you'll see that some people say exactly that. If we had had time, we would have done something more with a better design. So, well, the current main stakeholders, as I answered to Elena, will continue to have an important role in the new state of affairs. And that's something that, I mean, conferences will be continue to have an important live component, et cetera, et cetera. So, but those organizations that move faster in the implementation of the new models will concentrate more of the share if it happens the same as in the entertainment industry. But in order to move fast, trial and error in a systematic way is necessary. So nobody now will say if you do something that doesn't work so well, will tell you something. I mean, there's a tolerance for trial and error right now, but the organization needs to have built-in trial and error to be able to experiment more, to make sure to test new things and regarding integration of technology, and to see what works best for them. So that's something like a different mood for the organization that needs to be present. So, and before we continue with the questions, these are two additional resources besides the one that Jann mentioned just now. One is the difference between emergency remote teaching and online learning. So emergency remote teaching is what everybody has been doing now, trying to figure out what to do fast. But online learning has a lot of design and a lot of theory behind. So it's interesting to read that article. And also the survey recited by PCMA. I mean, with statistics about how COVID-19 is changing the business events industry in North America, and that was published this week too. So, and that will be it. And so we have discussion, questions, and comments. Mila.
Thank you both very much. There are a couple of questions that came in, written questions that relate to how do we assess outcomes in these platforms that are, you know, online versus, and how is that maybe different? If we can be very brief on that, I think it's an interesting topic in itself to develop a whole webinar on, but maybe if one of you would like to, just from the experience, Jann and Alvaro.
Alvaro,
Yes.
why don't you start?
Okay. No, outcomes can be measured and should be measured as you would have done it with a live event. So there's no reason for do any outcomes measurement different. But the advantage with any online platform is that you have a lot of information, a lot of data that everything can be tracked much better than with a live event. So evaluation should be the same, but you have more data for that.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Jann?
and I would just follow up and say that what the benefits of web-based learning, in addition to live learning or the sequential extended Congress things, gives you the opportunity to assess and monitor the formative evaluation processes that are going on throughout the activity, and give you an opportunity to course correct if you in fact need to, because you can even if the presentations were done asynchronously and have already been recorded and done the post-production, you can get back to the faculty and ask them to comment on questions that the participants have had in a way that you can't do in a live activity. And it creates an opportunity for the learners, if they heard something but didn't feel like they got all of the information, that they can actually go back and look at it again, which I think is an incredibly important piece of the reflective process, that you don't have to try to memorize everything all at once.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We are at the time, and I would like to, first of all, thank you both for a wonderful hour that you've spent with us. I'd like to thank everybody online who decided to spend your time with us, and I hope you have learned something. And before we close, just a reminder that the session is recorded. You will all receive a link to the recording with some additional resources. I hope that will happen very quickly. A reminder that SACME has put on a wonderful resource on the front page that I invite you to look at. Many schools have contributed content, both in terms of COVID content and also the solutions to problems that we face around conference management and in other areas, working remotely and so on, all the topics that we are all struggling with. In addition to that, if you would go back to that survey that you did in the beginning and click on the next page, there are a couple of follow-up questions. I invite you to complete the evaluations. They're brief. They tell us about what other topics you're interested in and guide our development. And really, that's it. I think we can close and look forward to new opportunities for getting together on these topics of interest to all of us. So with that, I'd like to close this webinar and thank you all again. Stay safe.